Thank you for joining us in Finding God in the world of video games. The evil empire has struck again, or so we thought anyway. Electronic Arts, better known simply as EA, is no stranger to controversy and gets a massive amount of general negativity. I mean, after all, it is companies like EA that continue to release annual franchise games, often with minimal improvements over the previous year, fork over the cash to purchase not only gaming franchises but entire studios, and they tend to monetize their games through microtransactions that are, well, we'll just say, less than warmly received by most of us in the gaming public. And when the word got out that EA had filed a patent for a progressively adaptive difficulty system, PDA, that would make the game harder for experienced players, well, that pretty much set off every gaming community that I'm aware of.
Websites immediately picked up on the news. Word of the class action lawsuits were made public, and the outcry began, until we all found out that this was merely a patent from 2016 that had already been issued and was simply being retained by the company. Whoops. Guess we can all put our pitchforks and torches back down. I mean, nothing to see here, right?
Well, I mean, we don't have a lot of pitchforks or torches around here. Not a lot of use for those.
I have forks.
Well, yeah, because we eat food.
That was tough.
I know why you try to ad-lib sometimes. So here's the actual funny thing. All right. The rubber band effect in gaming is nothing new. We've all felt it. Games not only becoming progressively harder, but sometimes our enemies magically improving their abilities in order to keep the game competitive. I mean, have you ever even played Mario Party? The computer will lose every minigame, make the dumbest choices possible for 48 out of 50 turns, but then suddenly land on a star balancing space that rewards them with all the gold and all the stars just 2 turns before the end of the game, and you don't have a chance to do anything about it.
Or maybe you've observed it in the way I have in racing games like Mario Kart, where you may have dominated the field for 2 out of 3 laps, but on the final lap, every racer gets the best power-ups and catches up with you to make it a race to the finish line on the final lap. And then somehow went from first to last place, always.
I feel like you were 7th once. Now, this ramp up in difficulty may not always be appreciated, especially in Mario Party.
Mario Kart.
You hear us? I doubt Nintendo's watching, but
it's all Mario games,
especially in Mario Party. But it is there to keep the player fully engaged in the game and enjoying the adrenaline rush that comes with that narrow, hard-earned victory. So, why did so many gaming communities and even established gaming journalists launch an attack on EA for something that all of us are fairly familiar with at this point? Well, in a word, money.
The immediate response from the gaming community was that this was a cash grab for EA, finding a way to wring even more dollars out of their titles by creating difficulty spikes that would incentivize players to pay for upgrades on sports titles such as FIFA in order to compete with this dynamic difficulty system.
But here's the funny thing. Oh, I said there was a funny thing earlier. I lied. That wasn't very funny. Here's the real funny thing.
Sure.
Just a few short years ago, we all heaped praise on Warner Brothers for enacting their Nemesis system in their Shadow of Mordor titles, which, interesting enough, made the game progressively harder. As enemies learned from previous encounters with the player, they would actually become stronger and more difficult to beat. I have listened to review after review complain about the consistent stupidity of the enemy AI in games like Assassin's Creed. And gamers' objections to simplistic and repetitive gameplay is often one of the biggest pieces of critical feedback that most games end up facing at some point.
So, why did so many websites and gamers get up in arms last week, or when, it was last week when we're recording this.
When you're watching this, it was
a few weeks ago, months
years
ago.
I'm long gone by now.
when we found out that EA was simply updating a patent that would make games adapt to our skill level in order to keep the game competitive when so many other times we praise other games for doing something similar? This question deserves a deeper look.
Which is good because we have a whole video about taking a deeper look. The truth is that in our video games, as well as in our daily lives, we tend to prefer to have the ability to adjust our difficulty level on the fly, based on a combination of our convenience and our perception of how it impacts us personally. For example, if you're last place in Mario Kart, you appreciate that the game pities you and changes you into a speeding bullet so you can catch up.
I do.
But this perspective is not typically shared by the person who is in first place, who has been receiving nothing but banana peels and coins for miles. Perhaps it has to do with our feelings of preparation and perception of value. I have played through each Halo game on every difficulty level because it gave me a reason to play through them multiple times, gain new achievements, and be able to lay claim to beating them on the most legendary of difficulties. But if I've had a bad day, or I'm just, generally feeling overwhelmed, the last thing I want is for one of my favorite games to kick my butt for 2 hours and make me feel worse.
As gamers, as well as just as members of humankind, it would be nice if the difficulty levels we face in life would understand where we are at mentally, emotionally, spiritually and scale the challenge to our current comfort zone. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
More often than not, I feel like my greatest challenges come hot on the heels of an already very bad day. Flat tires seem to watch and wait for the day we are already running late to work and have a very important meeting scheduled. The power goes out on the only day we set aside to relax and play some video games. Or, at a deeper and more personal level, challenges tend to stack themselves up like a bad game of Tetris on a psyche that is already struggling with financial troubles, our health, or the health of loved ones, or deeper emotional traumas that haunt our every waking hour.
Most of the time, the last thing we needed on our plates comes at a time when we have the least amount of room available on our already very full plates. And if we're being honest, regardless of our belief system, these things can leave us not only asking why, but also questioning the purpose of these events.
Now it's time for some direct answers to our dynamic difficulty predicament. Throughout Scripture, we find that this is actually the rule, not the exception, for those who have chosen the path of following the Lord. Now we're going to take a look at just a handful of examples. Let's start with Joseph, way back in Genesis. From chapters 37 through 50, he was the second youngest son of a nomad. So not a great start. Then he got sold into slavery by his own brothers. Well, that's much, much worse. Then he was thrown into prison under false charges. And then he ended up being in the throne room of Pharaoh. Or let's go to David. His story stretches from 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 2. He starts off just battling some wild animals that were trying to kill his sheep. Then he ended up facing some literal giants. You've probably heard of David and Goliath at some point. Then he ended up going head to head with the crazy king that he had fought the giant for. Then he ended up taking on multiple kingdoms in warfare. But this time as the king of Israel, not just as a shepherd boy. Or let's go with something entirely different here. The Apostle Paul. The entire book of Acts carries him from beatings to imprisonment to attempted murder, to shipwreck, to, during all of this, writing most of the New Testament that we're familiar with. Or maybe you're familiar with this guy. Maybe those were very obscure people. So let's pick one that we all might. Hopefully you've heard of him. His name's Jesus. He had a few books named after him, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all talk about him a lot. He starts off with rejection from his people, betrayal by his friends, torture by his entire religious government, to crucifixion, to sitting on the throne at the right hand of the Father. So while these might seem to be extreme examples, the truth is we could find many, many more character studies in dynamically increasing difficulty throughout the Scriptures. The path of a follower of Christ is not simply bounding from one mountaintop experience to the next, as nice as that would be. It is a daily walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And sometimes, even when we are soaring through the air on gilded wings, we can feel a lot like the sheep in that Pixar short that was completely fleeced before it could get back to bounding.
So, why do it? Why commit ourselves fully to the Lord, knowing that we face these constantly graduating difficulty levels?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's the next thing on the screen. So
I was about to say, I mean, technically.
So let's let Paul himself, since we mentioned some of his trials earlier, let's let him shed some light on the subject in his own words. 2 Corinthians 11, 24 through 27. Paul is going to list some of his major problems that he's had. So, from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Spent an entire night and day in the open waters. I've been in journeys often, in peril of waters, robbers, in peril of my own countrymen, peril from the Gentiles, and peril in the city, peril in the wilderness, peril in the sea. It's pretty much peril all the time. Peril among false brethren, in weariness and toil, sleeplessness, often, hunger, thirst, fasting often, in cold and nakedness. Now let's just jump forward here to 2 Corinthians 12:10. Therefore I take pleasure, it's a hard one to understand here, but we'll get there, in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. These trials, these difficulties, these challenges, they are not here to make us miserable, although there will certainly be times that we feel that way. Just as a game's increased difficulty is designed to make sure the game meets the challenge level of the player, our challenges in life are designed to force us into an increased dependence on Christ.
And the more legendary the challenges ahead of us, the more grace the Lord extends to us to meet our needs, like we see in 2 Corinthians 12:9.
Trials and challenges are the name of the game for both followers of Christ as well as those who have not heeded his call. I had problems during both sections of my life, but only those who have chosen to cast their burdens on the Lord will experience the benefit of his loving support through the hard times, as well as a meaning to these adversities that result in a fulfillment of our destiny.
We do not choose our battles, they choose us. But we choose the attitude with which we face them and the advocate that we face them with.
Dynamic difficulty is not new. Simply our awareness of it is. The truth is that before I was living for the Lord, I still got flat tires. I had arguments with family members. I ran out of money in the bank account. I faced hardships. I ran out of money in the bank account. Maybe I already said that one. I had a lot of things that happened before I ever fully committed my life to the Lord. The difference now is that I can choose to allow these experiences to press me even closer to his chest, throw myself at his mercy, seeking not only his intervention in my circumstances, but also his use of those challenges to forge me into an asset for his kingdom. An asset that a cozy, challengeless existence never would. When choosing a tool to sharpen a blade, nobody uses cake. And cake is great for many things, not great for sharpening knives. Only an inexperienced individual would grab, room temperature butter and expect that to improve the edge of a sword. As iron sharpens iron, as you see in Proverbs 27:17, these legendary difficulty levels grow our capabilities, make us more prepared for even larger responsibilities. Now, getting back to the gaming part, do I believe that Electronic Arts is purely thinking altruistically about the best interest of gamers in their design changes? I couldn't honestly say. Will we understand why our road in life was as challenging as it has been? Honestly, probably not that either. At least not on this side of eternity. But
but we hope to encourage you today to press on, past the point you thought would break you, further than where you stumbled and fell the last time, one checkpoint farther than your last round.
Don't hate the player or the game. Embrace the legendary difficulty and the battles that come with it. It is here in this crucible that we can most relate to the Lord, who chose to drink out of that cup that he would rather have passed on himself.